Now, there are a few strategies that people use to make their voices sound more female, which sometimes actually aren't that successful. And I want to talk about a few of those so you can kind of hear the problems in them and, possibly, avoid those common pitfalls. Uh, the first voice I'm going to try to do is a sort of Mrs. Doubtfire type. And it's kind of comical because it's a standard kind of voice that a man does in a movie or whatever when he's trying to pretend like he's a woman. And it's got this kind of forced sound, and I think you'll sort of hear what I'm talking about. Hi, I'm trying to sound like a woman, but I ended up sounding very forced and very kind of snooty or something. The next voice is, I call it the Minnie Mouse voice, and it's caused by people who are using a falsetto voice. And we'll talk more about falsetto in a little while, but the voice is really pinched because they're up in their register into a very forced point. And it kind of sounds like this. Hi, I'm just talking in my falsetto voice, and I sound like a cartoon character. This next voice I call the witch voice or the croaky voice. It's what's happening here is the person is almost getting rid of all the tone in their voice and just using this sort of creaking, croaky sound. Let me give you a little example. Hi, how are you? This is kind of the way that some people try to talk because it sounds really pinched and forced, and sometimes they just kind of whisper like this, and it just doesn't sound realistic, does it? The next voice I want to talk about, I call the drag queen voice. And this is characterized by a very sort of nasally sounding voice because they're pushing their voice up into their palate. And we'll talk about how they're doing this and how to avoid it in a minute. But it kind of sounds like this. Hey girl, you look fierce. Where did you get that dress? It's fabulous. The last one I want to talk about is a voice where I'm sure that they have difficulty on the phone because it sounds way too full and way too deep. Like, this is Debbie, and you can kind of hear how my voice, it sounds like I'm trying to do something, but it's still really too low. Since we live in a society where everything has been divided very sharply into either male or female, we're going to have to work with that model. But based on that, everything sort of runs along a spectrum between those 2 points. Some things are very masculine, some things are very feminine. And just like gender expression, which can be a balance of both. Like there's nobody who's like pure masculine or pure feminine. It's like everybody has a little bit of both in them. The same is true with your voice. All you're trying to do is change the balance so that more of your cues are feminine rather than masculine.
My mom used to say, don't use that tone of voice with me. And it's because we're constantly changing the tone of our voice. And it's so easy that you don't even think about it. All I'm going to do is show you how to change the tone of your voice so that it sounds more feminine. Once you understand how and you practice properly, it becomes just as easy as any other way that you change the tone of your voice. Now, as far as tone, the main characteristic of your voice is its tone, whether you're speaking or singing. So let's start there. Sound travels through the air in waves, and a tone is simply a sound that has a regular wave pattern. And there's 3 kinds of vibrations or patterns that affect your tone. The first one is your pitch, and that's the frequency of the vibration, which is measured in cycles per second or hertz. The more cycles per second, the higher the pitch. So in general, women's voices have a higher pitch, and men's voices have a lower pitch. So you see the difference, that it's that high-low thing. The next thing is the intensity or loudness, which is measured in decibels. And the third one is the biggest variable of the 3, and that's the quality. It's also called the timbre, and some people call it the resonance, and I do too. I think that's a good way to describe it. It's measured by a bunch of complicated stuff, like your overtones or the prominence of your primary tone, but we don't need to get into all of that.
Now, I mentioned earlier that your voice is basically a musical instrument, and there's three basic components to your voice. The first one is your lungs, which is what pushes the air through your throat, which is the second part, your voice box, which is where the vibrations occur. And then the final part is your mouth, which is sort of like the horn of a trumpet, where it's like the shape of your mouth is going to change the way your voice sounds. So when we're doing these exercises, there's things that you need to keep in mind. You need to keep your shoulders up and back, and you want to breathe in deeply through your nose like this. And you see how that feels with your chest sort of pushed out? You want to sort of hold that position. That's how you want your lungs when you're practicing. As far as your throat, the main thing is to keep your chin up so that your throat can sort of move freely and you're not getting all pinched like this. So, keep your chin up and pointed out. As far as your mouth, what you really want to do is a thing called lips together, teeth apart. And all that means is exactly how it sounds. You want to have about a finger's width worth of room between your upper and lower teeth. And then once you've got that established, just close your mouth, and at first it'll look like this, and then it'll settle. That's how you want to keep your mouth, because what that does is it maximizes your resonance out of your mouth and makes your voice louder so you don't have to strain your vocal cords as much. The next thing we're going to do is show you a couple of little slides of the vocal cords themselves.
The first diagram I'm going to show you as far as vocal anatomy is sort of a cross-section of your mouth. Now you can see the tongue is actually pretty big. We can only see a small part of it when we stick it out. And it goes way down into our throats. When you swallow, what happens is your tongue seals off your mouth by pressing up against your palate, which is the roof of your mouth. And then it forces all the contents of your mouth down your throat. Once you put your hand on your throat and swallow, and you'll be able to feel all those muscles sort of moving in unison. Now down in your throat where you're feeling, there's actually two tubes. The one in the back that you can't really feel goes to your stomach and is called the esophagus. And the one in front, which is the one you can feel, goes to your lungs, and that's your trachea. To keep food and saliva from going into your lungs, there's this flap of cartilage called the epiglottis, and that covers up your air passage as you swallow. When you breathe in and out, the epiglottis moves up and out of the way. The next diagram shows the cartilage in your throat. On the left side is a front angle view, and on the right is a side cross-section so that you can see inside where your vocal cord is. The hard stuff that comprises your ears and nose are made of cartilage too. It's softer, more flexible than bone, but it's still pretty rigid. So this area in your throat that we're looking at that's made of cartilage is called your voice box or your larynx. If you squeeze your throat with your fingers, starting under your jaw and moving down towards your collarbones, you're going to feel all kinds of lumps and bumps and ridges in the cartilage. And that's because your larynx actually has several different pieces. You have all sorts of muscles and ligaments in that area that move these pieces of cartilage around. If you put your fingers on your throat and swallow, you'll feel everything kind of move. It's a really complex process, and you don't even think about it usually. What we're going to do is look at ways that we can get that muscle to be more under our control. The thyroid cartilage, if you'll look on the chart, is the biggest piece, and that's the one that sticks out the most, and it's usually known by its common name, the Adam's apple. When you get a trachea shave to reduce the size of your Adam's apple, that's what the surgeon is cutting away. Now the trick is your vocal cords are right behind there, so they have to be really careful not to damage those or do anything that's going to change your vocal cords, because that'll totally change the way your voice sounds. The last thing we're going to look at is a cross-section from inside your mouth looking down your throat at your larynx, and this actually shows the vocal cords themselves. On the left there's a diagram, and on the right is a photo from the same angle. If you can see down at the bottom is the tongue and the epiglottis, and directly above them are your actual vocal cords. And there are these two identical sort of grayish muscles that stretch across your air passage, and they vibrate when air moves through your trachea. And you can actually see in the diagram that there's a little space where the air is coming through. these muscles can completely close together and seal off your air passage due to these vestibular folds that connect the vocal cords to the walls of your larynx. Most of the sounds that you can make are caused by using these muscles to change the shape of your larynx and to increase or decrease the tension of your vocal cords.